Hello everyone, this is Mark Kausler commenting on Toby the Pup in the Museum, which was the very first Toby the Pup cartoon done. It was one of Charles Mintz's earliest sound cartoons. As a matter of fact, the first gag in this is a musical gag because you hear that flute playing and you can't see who's playing the flute. And it turns out that it's Toby the Pup playing the flute on a mop handle, as you see in just a minute. And this cartoon was directed probably by, not by Dick Huemer, but by Sid Marcus, who was one of Dick's partners at this point. Dick Huemer, Sid Marcus, and Art Davis all teamed up under Charlie Mintz to make these cartoons. And there's where Toby the Pup tries to sneak away from the manager of the museum that disguises an old man. And this scene here was animated by Dick Huemer. You can kind of tell this. There's some nice overlap to it, and the shapes are very round, and there's a lot of nice overlapping action. Big hands, big feet, small bodies, small heads. That was kind of the design formula they were using here. Now this scene is probably the work of Sid Marcus himself, because he draws Toby a little bit differently. He draws him more with a prominent hairstyle, more with a pompadour, and he's got his head's a little less round. He's got kind of a collapsed looking cheek. And here there's a scene missing where he's polishing the foot of the statue, trims its nails like that, and then throws it in the air, and it winds up in the mouth. You can't see it there, but it's a very funny drawing. And here he's giving all the statuary a thorough cleaning. Dick Huemer, for some reason, loved these kind of stories with statuary coming to life. He did one with Scrappy later on, his little boy character called Stepping Stones. That's all about Scrappy in a museum with all the statuary coming to life. But they couldn't run it on TV because all the statues were naked. So they kept that one out, TV circulation. And you can see how all the gags, everything here is timed to music, like the way Toby walks with his little two-step, his time step as he's going along. Here's a typical gag of the early 30s where something smells bad, and somebody has to take care of it. Missing there is where the dinosaur skeleton gargles, and then all the mouthwash comes out its bones in a big shower. Now here's also a typical gag for the early sound where the character makes an instrument out of something. In that case, he makes an instrument out of his broom. And this is probably Dick's animation too, Dick Huemer's animation, judging from the way it's timed and the way Toby's moving around. The saving grace of the Charlie Mintz studio was the cycle, where you get a movement cycle going to timing. Now this little tongue-licking action is probably a reference to the way boxers used to lick their tongue and stuff before they would, they would wind up to be in the boxing ring. So it was a gesture that was really well known back in the early 30s. And here's Dick Huemer's favorite kind of gag with the statuary coming to life. And this is probably Artie Davis's animation of Toby doing a xylophone. And here's a little gag. This tune is called Mazel Tov. It's a little Yiddish tune that Dick Huemer probably grew up on when he was a kid. They just worked it into the soundtrack. Joe DeNat was the composer on these, by the way, and a wonderful composer, and he knew all sorts of obscure popular tunes which he used in his soundtracks. These wrapped up mummies were features of a lot of cartoons. The Van Buren studio, for instance, in the early 30s used lots and lots of characters, like their early version of Tom and Jerry visited Egyptian tombs with mummies all wrapped up. And they also love skeletons. They like to do skeletons, which is sort of a reaction to Ub Iwerk's Disney cartoon, The Skeleton Dance, which was quite popular. It's a 1928 Disney Silly Symphony. That's another typical sound gag where things get longer and shorter depending on how the music goes. and Toby's face coming out of the mouth of the statue. Now this is a sequence that Dick Huemer animated with these three statues coming to life with big floppy shoes. He liked to do dance animation, and this uses the principle of overlap, as you can tell from the floppy, flexible shoes and the way Dick handled that. This was kind of revolutionary for 1930, and you can see it there in this scene with the nose, the appendage flopping separately from the head. That's all called overlapping action. This was something that hadn't been done much by this point. Even in Dick Huemer's silent animation, he did a very crisp kind of thing, usually based on two drawings. And here he's got a lot more built into it. Now in this little scene of Toby dancing down the hallway, you can kind of see these statues are all wearing clothes, so they're not as censorious as what he came up with later in Stepping Stones. Now here Toby comes up to the manager. The manager's really angry and smacks him, and you can see it's like a strength tester at a carnival, and Toby presents him with a cigar. You know, congratulations. He's totally dizzy. Here's Toby the Pup in Circus Time, which was the sixth cartoon in the series, originally released January 25th, 1931. This one was actually directed, I think, by Dick Huemer. He always claimed that Toby was 70% Sid Marcus's creation, but I think in this case Dick actually did the direction on it. And the theme song is the same as the fantasy cartoons later on that were Columbia released. Now here's a parade shot, which supposedly Ben Harrison liked in his Crazy Cat cartoons, but here's Dick doing a Columbia parade for RKO. Notice all the attempts to do perspective animation in the roads and things. I love that little character that bites the dog's tail, and it's in a spiral and it goes woo, woo, woo. And this is an interesting long shot where it's just cycle animation. Again, this is what they used to save money. Here's the bearded lady, which is based on an actual bearded lady named Madame Olga. And the reason they're playing Shozen Kale Mazel Tov behind it is she was of Jewish parentage. And she also was featured in the movie Freaks in 1932, directed by Todd Browning. Here's little Egyptian characters. Not quite sure why they're in a freak show. This is a reference to Betty Boop, of course, the Tattooed Man, Dick Huemer's former boss, Max Fleischer. Now these two characters are conjoined, what they call conjoined twins, Siamese twins, and they're based on the Hilton sisters, Violet and Daisy Hilton, who were also in Todd Browning's Freaks. This sequence is all Dick Huemer's animation of Tessie, and Tessie is Toby's girlfriend. I love this sequence where she's bolstering her own ego by calling herself a little cutie and kissing herself in the mirror. Notice Toby and Tessie alliterative like Mickey and Minnie. Here she's singing "Shoe Fly, Don't Bother Me" and interpreting it to be "Because I Love Toby." And a typical Dick Huemer expression where he pops right up from under the tent. And this is typical of Dick Huemer's design. Great big heads, great big shoes and feet with a little tiny circle for a body. Now this sequence was animated by Sid Marcus. And again, they're trying for depth. You can see how the background is panning very slowly and the foreground is panning a little faster, which as long as the elements and under the camera keep moving, it has kind of a depth to it. And this was based on the early circuses, of course, the bareback riders and things like that. So this cartoon is interesting too because it captures a time in American history where we could have circuses and show animals of all kinds and so-called freaks in the freak show, and all that kind of thing has disappeared. Now that scene where the ringmaster grabbed Tessie, you see, was cut short, and that's probably a censor cut. This print runs very short. That's an interesting idea too, where the goat swallows shoes and they come out his hoofs. Now here's an example of what cartoon characters can do. They breathe in oxygen and exhale helium so that he can blow up his own nose and float down like a balloon. Now this is Artie Davis's animation. He has a very good sense of drawing, very beautiful line and very well done, good sense of volumes. But his timing at this point, he was still learning how to control a fight sequence. And the hits in the fight here are a little soft. Now there's a censor cut too, where originally he probably took down Toby's pants and exposed bare buttocks, and somebody from the Pennsylvania Board of Film Censors cut it out. There he emerges from a cloud of dust with a suit of armor on. That gag is also cut short. It looks like he probably spent a longer time originally punching the ringmaster in the stomach, and then his no sale, like a cash register, his no sale appeared in his eyes. These hits look soft. You know, they don't have a whole lot of force to them. They hadn't figured out the timing yet. This is almost a Felix the Cat gag, silent gag, where it appears that Toby's been killed to death. And then he just pops out of the grave and gives him the raspberry, and then runs away into the distance. Hello everyone, this is Mark Kausler again, commenting on Toby in The Milkman, which is the 7th Toby the Pup cartoon that was completed. Directed by Sid Marcus, and the animation was by Dick Humer, Sid Marcus, and Art Davis. This situation was something that was complained about a lot in the 1930s, was milkmen and dairies watering down the milk. And here you just have it super exaggerated. He's putting in 1 little drop of milk per bottle. This is probably Sid Marcus's animation here. You can see how simply he's done the cow. This is probably Sid's animation too, of Toby loading the milk bottles onto the wagon. Now the music Jody Nat's using underneath of this is Oats, Peas, Beans, and Barley Grow. Maybe you know that song. It was sung a lot back in the 1920s. You can see how all of these gags, everything works with the rhythm of the sound, like oats, peas, beans, and barley grow, when he's tapping the back of the horse. Here's the horse is just doing slow somersaults in time to the music, and Toby is bouncing up and down to the rhythm of the beat. Guy's not wasting a drop of milk, he just takes it up in a syringe. This also was a situation dating from the 20s and the teens where the horse knew the milk route better than the driver. Yeah, this is probably Artie Davis's animation of Toby, where he has got the kind of a collapsed head. His head is not perfectly round, and he just threw a milk bottle at the doorstep with an anchor on it so it wouldn't move. This is a funny bit where the where the milk bottle just tries to lick up the spilled milk with a little tongue coming out of the top of it. That's called extenders. Maybe you don't see them as much anymore, but that used to be what they used to hang clothes on and things. An extender putting a step over to where Toby is. And here's the horse. He's a union man. He's looking at his watch and he's signaling time out for lunch. And of course, Toby just breaks every milk bottle. And I'm pretty sure this is Sid Marcus's animation. He puts his spats on over his head. Kind of like her. And he pulls his cane out of his belly button. And he gets his axe out of his tummy. This is sort of very much the way they did Bosco at Warner Brothers. Bosco got everything out of his pants. Matter of fact, Toby, Bosco, Flip the Frog, all these characters were made in reaction to the success of Mickey Mouse because they were all sort of funny little animals, nondescript personalities that their sole purpose was to move in time to the music. If he tries to wake up his horse, the horse won't move, so he's got a funny little cylindrical looking car in the back of the milk wagon. This is also very typical of the way these stories are put together, in that they're almost stream of consciousness. They just move from one section to the other. Now this, Art Davis probably animated this, a very unusual effect with these tires shrinking and growing. I don't know if it really gave the illusion he was trying to give, but it's an interesting attempt at it. Now, here's the kind of sequence I love. I'm not quite sure who animated this, but this is so typical of early sound, where the clouds have faces and they're angry and they rain by perspiring. It's a very interesting idea. And I think Artie Davis animated this because he loved to do effects, and he loved to do mechanical things like cars, trains, things of that sort. So Toby's trying to run away from the rain here. Not sure who animated this, but it's all cypress trees falling over in time to the music, and then the little white tree gives him the raspberry. Everything's done to the tempo of the music, moving at kind of a slow tempo. They hadn't really discovered real speed in cartoons yet. This is too early in the sound era for them to do that. And here's where Toby just comes to the camera very slowly. Now this is unusual in that his belly button, you don't know it, but his belly button came off when he went under the door, and he picks it up and puts it back on him like a decal. And then the tree is getting so wet he wants to be let in the house too. So now we move to sort of the third act of the cartoon, and it's just all these characters moving in time to an interesting old tune, which unfortunately I don't know the name of. That's a very economical cycle. Just the pan background goes back and forth. And here's what they call an embarrassment gag, which you kind of have to look at. The cow's skirt falls down, and then she just suddenly notices it and picks it back up again. It's called an embarrassment gag. And this was very typical of this kind of cartoon where you have cycles. Everything's based on movement cycles. And the little mice goes back to the Paul Terry cartoons, which Dick Huemer and the Fleischers loved. They would work in little mice activating everything. This is probably inspired by the Mickey Mouse cartoons. Mickey dancing with a big fat pig. The pig's corset comes off, and she's so heavy she's weighing down the top of Toby's head, and he can hardly dance. Wiping the nose, very typical of 30s gags. This is Artie Davis's animation. You can tell by the pompadour of a Toby, where he's just dancing around. And here he falls over a spittoon, and the cigars dance. That's all, folks. This is the Toby cartoon called Down South, which is the 9th cartoon in the series. This might have been directed by Dick Huemer, actually. I don't know if Sid Marcus did this one or not. But this is Artie Davis's animation again, because you can tell he loved doing machinery. And this cartoon was inspired by the Mickey Mouse cartoon big hit, Steamboat Willie. But they made it a lot more complicated than Ub Iwerks did. He only had 3 little whistles. Here they have the whistles and smokestacks underwater, and a fish chimes in for the last little note. And this is the song they're playing here. Jody Nat is playing is Steamboat Bill. And here the little band is playing Way Down Upon the Swanee River. And I think Dick Huemer animated this scene himself. Now this is typical of 30s humor. The implication is he needs to go to the bathroom. At least we assume that, you see. But in reality, they pulled a switch on you. He's really just running the turnstile. And he winks at the audience because he's defying expectations. So here Toby is spitting into a spittoon. They love spit jokes in the 1930s. Walt Disney did a lot of those himself. And a musical gag. One smokestack playing the other. So they're playing Here Comes a Showboat, and here comes the steamboat with both paddles preceding the boat, and then it just sort of sidles over to the pier. Now, the underscore here is a tune called Down South by a man named W.H. Middleton, and it was used in Disney's cartoon Silly Symphony, The Cat's Out, and it was also used in a wonderful Fleischer cartoon made almost the same time this was being made, called Swing You Sinners. That little tune da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da was actually stolen by Middleton from a Norwegian tune, a Norwegian folk tune called Siar Ervar. So there's a whole lot of stealing going on here. But all these little characters in this crowd scene, you can tell were all designed by Dick Huemer, even though he may not have animated them here. But it's typical of his designs. If you see Fleischer cartoons like Up to Mars or a lot of the Coco cartoons where he animated the crowd scenes, you'll notice similar design characters. I love this sequence, is that it's showing like, it's sort of like what a politician must go through, or a captain. You have to continually greet strangers and smile at them and be friendly. And Toby's having a hard time getting his smile to stay up, so he oils it and it collapses. So he's going to look insincere. He's concerned about that. So he gets his monkey friend to climb up on a wire, and he rigs it so that he can pull the monkey's tail and still keep his sincere smile going, greeting all these passengers that are coming on his showboat. This is the cute little girl coming up, Tessie, that Dick Huemer designed. And he probably animated this scene too. Notice that her fingers are pointed. Now they're singing the song Mississippi Mud, which Bing Crosby and the Rhythm Boys had a big hit with in the 1920s. This is all Dick's animation here. She's singing to the old Southern Colonel. Notice all the characters Dick designed, they're just painted on the background. That's also typical of Dick's timing, where Tessie kisses Toby really quick. Dick liked to come out of a cycle and do really a quick little gag, quick little timing. These walruses are all singing in time to the music. Also, typical of 30s animation, he's plucking the goat's whiskers in time to the sound of Mississippi Mud. Charles Mintz must have loved this scene because they just keep using the same cycle, but the soundtrack gets more and more desperate and more speeded up. But it's the same drawings, just repeated, and they get louder and louder as they sing Mississippi Mud. And Tessie's getting kind of worried. The steamboat starts running wild and bounces Toby the pup way up in the air. I think this is Dick's animation. They usually gave him the dialogue to do. Any dialogue sync they would let him take care of. Now this is Artie Davis's animation of the little mouse trying to pull in a giant flounder, and the flounder runs away. Look at all that stuff of the fish avoiding the steamboat. Very complex. This scene where the steamboat is careening down the stream, jumping over bridges, it's extremely flexible stuff. Much more ambitious than what Ub Iwerks tried to do in Steamboat Willie, going through rocks. It's based on melodrama, you know, where the heroine is carted away by the villain, or by, in this case, just a runaway craft of some kind, a steamboat. This is kind of a funny underwater shot. Dick Huemer animated this himself with the turtle. The lump on his head grows up so large that Toby can just climb right up and come onto the steamboat. And Artie Davis animated this mechanical contrivance. It's very interesting. It's sort of like an autogyro, in that he's just got these twin propellers, and he goes out over the waterfall right at the camera, and Tessie and Toby are kissing at the end of the cartoon. Hello everyone, this is Mark Kausler commenting on the Toby the Pup cartoon Halloween, which was the 10th cartoon in the series, released May 1st, 1931. This was probably directed by Sid Marcus, although some of the best animation in it is Dick Huemer's. And in this cartoon they really started to make breakthroughs in the personality of Toby, which is very interesting. This is all of Dick's animation in the opening stuff of Toby jumping up and down. You can see how regular it's drawn and how well done the circles are. He looks a little bit like Coco the Clown here with his mouth. And this is typical of Dick's timing, doing very rude things very quickly. Kissing the girls, pulling on the elephant's trunk. And here's Tessie, which you saw in the Down South cartoon. He's just doing rude things to her. He's kissing her over and over again. And you can say she doesn't like it, so she slaps him. This is probably an old song that Joe Dinat used, but I couldn't find out who wrote it, unfortunately. It has like a schoolroom, schoolgirl kind of quality to it. These are sort of like little kids. I love now that's a really good example of using size to convey emotion. Toby's so embarrassed he gets small and shrinks into his shows. Here's where he says, "Can't you take a joke?" And Tessie's very haughty. And see, Dick actually takes time to show Toby thinking, which is really getting into advanced character.
I'll play the piano.
So, do you see where he said, "Play the piano for ya"? The mouse shape on "ya" is this little pursed lips with little teeth, which you'll see in Dick's animation of Scrappy if you look at the early Scrappy Columbias that he did with the little boy character. And here's R.D. Davis's stuff. You can tell because everything's so mechanically done and perfectly drawn, where the goat chews a piece out of the table and spits out another stool to put his feet on. Here's Toby playing in sync, the piano in sync with the track. Big stuff in the early 30s. Mickey Mouse did it over and over again, playing instruments, especially the piano. That really went over great with audiences. You notice they used the goat for a lot of gags in this. This is Dick's animation. You can kind of tell by the way the smile's done and the way Dick does the head in opposition to the body. Now this is probably Sid Marcus's, at least his idea of a joke. This is not his animation. Because they love things, homely things in the 30s, like wormy apples. This is a worm being interrupted in his bath and pulling an asbestos curtain down. That's an old theatrical reference. In those days, theaters all had curtains made out of asbestos material so they wouldn't catch fire. That was that whole thing. Here he is. Toby's dressed as a pumpkin. Here's another gag with the goat. Probably R.D. Davis's animation. Yeah, you can kind of tell by the way he's drawn Toby with that big pompadour. Now here's Dick's animation again. Everything again in sync with the track and looking like a piano. Look at the way the heads of the characters shake when after in reaction to being hit on the head. See, they kind of shake as they go down. Dick Huemer did that over and over again, especially in the Scrappy series. I love this scene. Did you hear that little time? Dun, 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 dun. In the 1920s, that was called "You're a Horse's Ass." That's what that music usually meant. It was kind of a rude finish. Now this witch sequence is looking forward to a Scrappy cartoon that Sid Marcus directed in 1936 called "Puttin' Out the Kitten." And this sequence, the mysterious music, kind of Halloween theme that Joe Dinat wrote himself at least twice in the Columbia cartoons. As a matter of fact, the theme song to the Toby the Pups was later used for the fantasy cartoons at Columbia. Just took the same music and reused it. As a matter of fact, very few people have seen these cartoons since they were released because Dick Huemer told me that Charles Mintz was so ashamed of the series when it was done because it was not a big moneymaker that they actually buried the negatives and the prints in the ground. So this is typical of Sid Marcus, Dick Huemer kind of animation where these characters are falling on a parachute and all kind of pulling at the same time, overlapping in different ways. Flexible chimney. Very much like the smokestacks in the Going South picture. And here's another embarrassment joke where the witch loses her pantalettes as she falls down. I love this kind of stuff. Max Fleischer did this over and over again, doing spooky effects. A skeleton comes out of nowhere and scares Tessie, and then she's spanked by another skeleton. This gag was inspired by probably looking at cascading fountains. For no reason at all, these little skeleton dinosaur kind of creatures come and each one drinks water successively or punch successively until it just comes out as a tiny drip at the bottom. Now this is Dick's animation again. Toby being scared by a curtain falling on him. Look at the beautiful handling of the shadows and the way Dick did that. Again, look at that quick little timing. He kicks the ghost and ducks right under the sheet. Very typical of Dick's timing. Everything's quickly timed and very appealing. Did you see that shake when he was scared by the ghost? This is a little 2-drawing maneuver, just based on 2 drawings. And Dick Huemer worked all that out. This final scene in the cartoon is a combination of Dick Huemer and probably Artie Davis animation. Artie Davis did the ghosts and Dick did Toby. Toby's crowing like a rooster, which means Halloween's over and dawn is coming. And it looks like he laid an egg because he's a chicken. And he says, "Daddy," and he runs out.